Trey, you've been working on quite a few things. Tell me a little bit about it.
Michael, what I wanted to talk about today is just the very glory of God Himself in every little part of this place. And there's so many voices that are out there in this day and age to tell you that there is no such thing as a God. There is no such thing as a creator. And I believe full and well that in this very radio broadcast that we're talking on this very second, that it's demonstratable. It's not only provable, it's not only possible, but it's demonstratable to every single ear that's listening to this broadcast that there is in fact a creator for every star, every galaxy, the earth itself, right down to the molecular fabric of your skin, the cells, and even the quantum particles that make up the fabric of this entire place. And that's what I wanted to take a short walk through, if we could, amongst other things we might talk about on this journey here this Saturday.
Sunday. It's Sunday today. Yeah, I'm a little bit confused as well. I know you've been quite ill over the last week. I've been ill too. So I'm on. Yeah, I think we're both on the way of recovery now. But yeah, what you're saying is quite profound and it's quite amazing because, as you say, there's creation. We see it all the way around us. Today, when I was sort of driving back home from church, it was quite amazing to see how nature changes. And a few weeks ago, everything was just dead. All the vegetation was dead, and now everything is turned green, and it's like living in a different place. And sometimes you think to yourself, is this all by chance? The variation you see, even in our environment, which is sort of slightly gone down a little bit, highly cultured and so on, but some beauty still left in it. And you think there must be a creator, there must be something, there must be some intelligence behind it who has done all this.
Well, this is a topic. This is a topic, Michael, that has been beaten so hard. Where there's no other arena of science where or anything called science where the objective is to mock at anyone that would question. In this case, what we're discussing is evolution. So just for a student per se to evaluate whether or not evolution is true, there are so many in the last several years of studying evolution. The thing that fascinated me wasn't really the science of the evolution, because proving or finding out that evolution doesn't work is something that any average person can do. You do not have to be a scientist on the other side of this radio broadcast to establish that evolution doesn't work. In fact, there's less evidence for evolution than there is for Bigfoot.
Okay, why is it, Trey? Let me play a little bit the opponent here. Why is it that it's taught all over in schools? I know America may be a little bit different to Europe. I know in Europe, evolution is just taught as fact. I know in Germany, in German schools, English schools, and they just take it as the official curriculum, and it's taught.
Well, these are political agendas, and people don't realize how frequently this happens, particularly with sciences. And in fact, this happened. Sciences are redundantly used for political agendas in this day and age. In fact, since the inception of one of the sciences that has been used since the very beginning as a political tool. It was first really popularized not amongst the scientific community. You would not have found Albert Einstein out there pitching you that dogs could turn into whales or that dragonflies could turn into dinosaurs. These men, we're a far cry in this hour from the hour of men like Albert Einstein or Max Planck, the actual father of physics itself. No, the theory of evolution was initially favored and popularized actually by Adolf Hitler. Was one of the first guys to really grip onto this thing.
So why did Adolf Hitler latch onto evolution. What was his reason for that?
The theory itself, allows for human beings, to be defined as as no better than animals, and so in that sense, there is no, whatever I do to you it's all fair game. There's no God.
So what you're saying is that he made a distinct profit, or he had a benefit for his ideas by hijacking the theory of evolution and assuming that is the correct interpretation.
Well, it's a theory of convenience. It's a theory that allows one to do whatever they want with you're not accountable to anyone. If there's no God, then you're not accountable to anyone.
So anything goes. In other words,
anything goes, and I don't think that it matters how bad the science is, as long as it can reasonably be plausibly sold as possibly true, and and even the people selling it often believe it because they want that to be true so bad that you can do whatever you want to do. There's no God, there's no accountability, and so, but that really doesn't answer the question of whether or not the theory is true or not. Now, demonstratably, the theory is not true, but it is true that the theory of evolution, that its core supporters since the very beginning have been the less than desirables, and that would include, at its inception, Adolf Hitler. The evolution would run you into the eugenics programs that would take place in Nazi Germany.
So, why eugenics? What's the link between evolution and eugenics? By the way, can you just explain what eugenics is?
Well, eugenics, the eugenics programs would ultimately go on to become, German eugenics would become American eugenics, which would eventually become, here in the United States, what we call Planned Parenthood today, which is the largest abortion provider on the face of the planet Earth. Okay,
how did Hitler use eugenics? Was it, I know he had these programs of breeding blondes and stuff like that.
Well, you're reducing what you're doing is that you're reducing the number of quote unquote undesirables, and so one mechanism for doing this is through the abortions. Yeah, okay. So that's how we do that today. But the eugenics programs don't have to be limited to that. Eugenics programs can extend to include simply exterminating people.
Yeah. He had this, obviously, he had this extermination camps, but he also handicapped, disabled people. They were either sterilized or murdered. Yeah, there were two options because they were not beneficial for the people. I know one guy personally where this is happened. Not murdered, but he was sterilized, and he suffered all his life. I met his wife, and she told me the story. It was quite tragic when you hear what's happened to him.
Well, in this theory, any undesirable. That's. One of the things that evolution has commonly been used for is for population control and population reduction.
Yeah, okay.
It's also very beneficial to convince the common man that he's no better than an animal, because what that imposes on the common person's mind is that you're expendable. And that also makes it much more easy to define you as property of the state.
Yeah, Trey, maybe just to make the point, before we go any further about eugenics, some people might get very upset here when they hear this. We're not saying that evolution caused Hitler to kill people, but what we're saying is that Hitler used the theory of evolution to try and justify killing live or sterilizing people who were considered to be of no benefit to the nation or to the people, in his view. Is this correct, or is...
Well, it's correct. I'm going to go a step stronger than Michael.
Okay, go ahead.
And be willing to offend people by saying that that's a common application that has ended up happening with that, because this did not just happen with Adolf Hitler. This happened under Stalin as well. Mm-hmm. And this also, Karl Marx wrote a page or maybe 2-page absolute love letter to Charles Darwin at the beginning of his book about Marxism. That's how he intros his book, is with this long dedication to Charles Darwin. So, despite anything else about the theory of evolution, it is in fact undeniably true that the parties that are immediately attracted to this particular theory are people that tend to be dictators, that tend to turn out to have some of the most inhuman ideas on the face of the planet Earth. And this in and of itself is a disturbing facet to me, that in today's day and age, not only does the science not work, and we're going to go through that, and this isn't like a little bit off this way or a little bit off that way, or it might work if you tweak it like this or like that. I'm going to walk you through some basic sciences here on this radio show.
Okay, go ahead.
And why exactly this doesn't function. But on a greater scale than that, no, Michael, what I'm telling you is that this is a portion of science that has commonly been used as an agenda against the people, and they've had it sitting there in the back pocket. So here, at minimum in the United States, where I sit, and where you're sitting today, whether you're sitting in Europe or wherever you are, in many nations, this is taught as curriculum in the science classes, and is presented to children as fact that you came from animals. Yeah. There's some basic problems with that conjecture.
Okay. Before we go into this, because I think it's really important, because if you are just an evolved monkey, and I think we're coming to that as well, it's a real problem, isn't it? Because you're an evolved monkey. That means, first of all, it's an identity problem. What are you? Where are you coming from? Are you special? Are you not special? If you're just an animal, you're just an animal. So you need to live like an animal and fight your corner to dominate possibly other animals. But just to come back, I mean, when you look at Stalin and also at Hitler, in communism, we've got the dialectic materialism, and that one was clearly based on evolution, and it was just assumed to be the logical consequence of evolution and the way man develops, that the outcome would ultimately be communism to try and create a better society. I mean, we all know it didn't quite happen that way. Even I think what Marx said and what happened in the end with socialism was quite different. Marx said it was automatically happening. In the Soviet Union, they tried to make it happen by force, but it didn't quite work, as we all know. Hindsight is always better. Third Reich, same thing. Didn't last very long. The super race didn't make it, and the whole theory fell over on itself. But the interesting thing is, there's a lot of blood has been shed, and I mean, some people claim that there were more people dying in the Soviet Union under Stalin's regime. I mean, he was killing more of his own people than the Germans did in the Second World War, and I'm not quite sure whether these figures add up. But regardless, a lot of blood has flown based on these concepts, and on dictators justifying themselves ultimately through something like the concept of evolution. They're not accountable to anybody, are they? I think that's one problem.
It's a big problem.
You're coming from nowhere. You're going to nowhere. Who are you accountable to other than yourself?
Here's the fundamental, Michael, and here's why I took an interest in this, and why I think no matter who you are or what you believe on the other side of this radio show, here's why I'm talking to you about this today. Here's why I've been willing to put up YouTube videos, which this is one of the most unpopular subjects. This is a subject that will literally get you mocked at. And as far as I know, I'm the only guy on YouTube. This may not be true, but I mean, as far as I've seen in terms of YouTube videos that have been put up that would support anything that's against evolution, they get attacked immediately. They get
actually, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like a phenomenon. I mean, there's no other type. I've made many YouTube videos. Some of them are you could consider at least quasi successful in the hundreds of thousands of views. And I've never seen anything like it, where you put up a video against evolution, they get attacked. But that has not happened to mine, which is unusual amongst the group of videos that do a presentation against evolution. And I'm going to suggest as a possibility why that hasn't happened this. Because it's important to my own heart, not what I want to believe, or not what you want to believe on the other side of this radio show, or what Michael wants to believe, or the guy down the block wants. I don't care what, or Stalin wanted to believe, or Hitler, or anybody else. This is a big question. We're here on this planet. And the three most important questions for every single man, woman, and child breathing on the face of this planet Earth: who are we? Where did we come from? What happens next? Mm-hmm. If Darwin had been right 150 years ago, I would be disappointed with that. I would hate that to be true. But I would have to be intellectually honest with myself and say that's the way that it was. Mm-hmm. But that's that's not been the result of my research by any stretch of the imagination. And I believe that these questions, these very questions, are worthy of much more time than people put into them. And what the evolution does offer people is a slip-short answer to a very large-scope question. And I think it's one of the most costly answers that you could allow yourself to believe, because you're shortcutting the very glory of your creation itself to something else.
Yeah, true. I agree with you. I think a big question is the destiny. Where are you going to? If there is no God, we've got a big problem, and that means anything. It's like what you said right at the beginning. Anything goes. Yeah, you can do what you want. Nobody, will hold you to account. If you are in a position where you can get away with it, you just go for it. Yeah, and you do what you want to do. But ultimately, it's deep down. It's a philosophical question. I mean, personally, I believe in God. I know He exists. Down to my personal experience, and I know, Trey, with you, it's the same thing. You believe as well. Many people try to take God out of the equation. Yeah. And I think they're working really hard to try and get rid of God, and to get rid of the ultimate authority they're answerable to. Do you think evolution is a reason for evolution? Why we have evolution?
Okay, well, there's a fundamental. Okay, there's already a fundamental problem when you're trying to do that, because first of all, it doesn't matter what any one of us try and do. That's one of the first conclusions when I began to study any of these topics. I don't have a control on how it actually works. Mm-hmm. So me deciding that I want evolution to be true, for example, or if I decide that I want there to be pink unicorns, or any of these things that I may decide that I want them to be the way that I view the world, doesn't really matter. It doesn't have an impact on what's real or what's not real. So the question to me really becomes, does it actually work? Is it true? What is this? Is Genesis true? These are two diametrically opposing views. Mm. Okay. Is there a God, or did we evolve?
Okay, you're coming back to the point of view. It doesn't really matter what you believe, but what is truth? Yeah, and you should be able to find out what truth is by applying a few simple tests of seeing whether the science, for example, the evolution guys bring, works, or maybe the story in Genesis, as it is described in Genesis, that man is created, whether that one is more logical, and the evidence we find today seems to tie up more with one or the other. You would say that?
Yeah, yeah. You should be able to do that within a few minutes. In fact, we can go right into it. I mean, the theory of evolution, and I want to start by saying this: is that I guess I've had issues with evolution my entire life, but in the course of the last 2 years, I've heavily studied this topic.
Okay.
And I haven't, most all of my research on evolution itself, the fundamental core of it, because it's easy to disprove evolution is not terribly difficult. And a 10-year-old on the other side of this radio show is capable of accomplishing that. In fact, I would pose that to you. If you're someone on the other side of this radio show that's listening to this, and you're a hardcore believer in evolution, if what you believe is that true, I would challenge you. I would challenge you to put it to the test. Don't listen or trust any word that I tell you on this show. Don't because this is important to you. It doesn't matter to me right? What you end up believing. But it should matter to you. And it should matter to you whether what you believe is sound ground or not, and what you're standing on.
Okay.
And so I would challenge you, if you have it within you, and it takes some guts to do that. I know that your heart can race, because there can be some fragileness there. Is what I'm believing, is it solid ground or not?
Mm-hmm.
But go in there and take a look and comb through what it is that you've been looking at. I had a man call me a couple weeks ago. He said to me, he said on the phone, he says there's the truth is that there's less evidence for evolution than there is for Bigfoot. And I thought to myself, actually that's true in terms of, he was talking about in terms of the bone structures and stuff. Evolution primarily has this one bone structure that they call Lucy, which is a dead monkey, right? It's almost a complete bone structure of a dead monkey that they believe walked upright. I really don't disagree with that one way or the other. But in totality, the amount of bones that they've got that are their claimed evidence for evolution, and these are monkey bones, most of them. Some of them are human bones, but they're either all monkey or they're all human. It's not. These would fit on half of a school lunchroom table. And when you look at the guys with the Bigfoot stuff, they can fill up a whole children's lunchroom. But I thought to myself immediately when he made this statement, that's really unfair to the Bigfoot people to put evolution and Bigfoot side by side. And here's why: because Bigfoot is not asking me to deny every single science known to man. It's commonly phrased by evolutionists that this is a fight between evolution and religion. But in my research on this topic, I have not found that by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I find the evolutionists mocking at religious people, but that's not really where the fight is, if I'm looking at it properly, because their true fight is with their own sciences. Mm-hmm. Their true fight between evolution is with actual science. Here's why. First place where evolution has a breakdown, the part that that anybody should bring up to you right off of the bat, is entropy. This is the second law of thermodynamics. Mm-hmm. It does not just apply to heat. It applies to any time you have a complex system. Complex systems deteriorate to chaos over time.
Things okay, quickly explain what entropy is in more detail.
Well, bottom line, things fall apart. Given enough time, things go to chaos.
Okay.
Organized systems deteriorate to chaos over time. Okay. And this applies whether you're dealing with an open system or a closed system. That's one of the the evolutionists will they'll bicker back and forth about how it applies to open and closed systems. Decay occurs whether you've got an open system or a closed system. It doesn't matter. So that's your first one. That's the second. And notice the word laws in front of that. Mm-hmm. So this is the second law of thermodynamics. The next one would be biogenesis. Okay, and this again, you've got the law of biogenesis. Now, biogenesis states, of course, that life only comes from other life. This isn't a terribly complex concept. This is what we observe. There's never been any aversion, not in the history of science, the history of mankind, the history of anything that we know. That's why it's called a law, and this is observable every single day. And this not only applies just to the animals, it applies to the trees. Every type of tree comes from a pre-existing tree. Right? Mm-hmm. Every tree comes from a seed. You need that seed. And that seed's not just a little bitty nothingness thing that came together over time. That seed is a complex piece of coding that makes a very specified type of plant or tree. Apple trees do not produce pear trees. Mm-hmm. Or apple seeds do not produce pear seeds, or orange trees or grape trees. Every type of seed is specified. Now, there's variation within animals and within plants, right? So, and we'll get to that in just a second with Mendel's laws of genetics. On biogenesis, though, every DNA strand, every little piece of programming code comes from a pre-existing DNA strand.
Yeah.
Every tree comes from a pre-existing tree. Every animal comes from a pre-existing animal. Every cell from a pre-existing cell. In Darwin's day, 150 years ago, many folks used to believe in something called spontaneous generation. Okay, you would get laughed at now if you tried to say this in the life sciences, that spontaneous generation could occur. Spontaneous generation, what it means is that life can emerge from non-life. For example, if you saw mold appear, perhaps it had spontaneously generated. Of course, we now know about spores and these kinds of things. The mold did not spontaneously generate.
Yeah.
If you saw worms come, or maggots come on meat, perhaps they had spontaneously generated. If you saw rats appear in the garbage, perhaps they had spontaneously generated. And I know that could easily sound laughable on the other side of this radio show, but this is sincerely things that people believed during that time, including Charles Darwin himself. That things could spontaneously generate. So what's actually happened? Now, this is fascinating because a lot of my studies have not just been on the, again, as I said, disproving evolution is a simple part of the equation. The fascinating thing about evolution is not the theory of evolution. The fascinating thing about evolution is the mindset of the people that believe in evolution. That's the part that will bedazzle you. So this is what they've done in the educational community in regards to the spontaneous generation thing. What they've done is they've moved the spontaneous generation. What they did is they retitled it, and they called it abiogenesis, right? So this is the reverse of biogenesis. And they selectively pulled it out of the life sciences and put it in chemistry, right? So that way you can't test the origin of life issue, right? Which violates biogenesis.
Okay. Listeners, we've just lost the connection to Trey. Let's see whether we can get him back. I'm just going to run a little bit of music in the meantime. Just a moment. Yeah, we are back here with Trey. Let me see whether I plugged you in right. Trey.
Yeah, I'm here, man.
Okay. We are back in business. Computer crash. These are the beauties of a live show, live radio show. You get to hear all the things which go wrong, which is quite a challenge itself. Trey, since we've had a little bit of a break, you've got a project as well. So some people might be totally disgusted at the things you're saying. Others might be quite interested. What's your website? How can people find out more about you?
Well, you can go over to www.godinanutshell.com, so just like it sounds, godinanutshell.com, all one word, or look up on YouTube Trey Smith, and the topics, guys, listening to the show, if you are disgusted by the topic we've been talking about, there are a great number of topics that get discussed on my different channels, including committing a safe robbery on a television pastor in 1999. I was a stupid kid that did that about 15 years ago. Different guy today than I was then. But this topic that we're speaking on right now is one that's rested on my heart, and I'm not meaning to disgust or offend, even if you're the hardest core atheist on the other side. One of my best friends that I talk to on the phone on at least a week-to-week basis is a hardcore atheist, and I love him to death with all of my heart. We disagree greatly, but the reason that I'm talking to you about this, the reason I put things out there that are controversial on this subject, is because it's rested on my heart so heavily to express to you through any precious way that I can that there's some very practical day-to-day reasons why this doesn't work, and why the picture is larger in scope, in my opinion. And I would ask you to consider that as worthy of your attention. This life that we live is so desperately short. I mean, it is like a snap, just a breath, a little wind that's here today and gone tomorrow. And the fundamental questions that face all of us are the same. And what I'm telling you in regards to evolution is the same thing I would tell you in regards to the crookedest of the religious guys. Is that there are people out there that pitch agenda after agenda after agenda in their own best interest, whether that be religious, whether that be science, whether that be political. And at the end of the day, it really boils down to what's true in your own life, and all of those voices will fade aside. And I would beg with you. I would plead with you to consider yourself worthy of examining these questions. They are worthy of your attention.
Because obviously there's a big question, if evolution is right, just if, and if there is no God, then you've got nothing to lose. All you have is this short life here, and that's it. But if Genesis is right, suddenly you've got a God you're accountable to. And also, if Genesis is right, there are much more implications, and one of them is that you are eternal, and you've got an eternity to face. And one day you will have to face God. And that's quite an important aspect, and you really need to get to grips with it, and you need to challenge this question in your own life to come to terms. If there's a God, you need to find God, and you need to make peace with him in one way or another, and you need to find the truth.
I can't speak to the issue of the age of the earth, and I know there are a lot of guys that go back and forth to that. But what I can tell you is this, is that in terms of the fossil record itself, and what I've looked at in the fossil record, we've found tons and tons and tons of fossils at this point. In Darwin's day, there weren't very many fossils. Today, we have piles of fossils, okay? And fossils for animals are always deer are always deer, dinosaurs are always dinosaurs. But what I'm telling you is that there aren't fossils. When they use the term transitional fossils, what this means is animals that would be gradually turning into one another over periods of time. That's how the theory of evolution works. Is the idea here is that we started with sort of little critters that somehow came to be by accident, and over time they've sort of progressed and become more and more complex animals, changing into the variety of species of creature that you see on the planet today. So that's what Darwin's theory fundamentally is stating. What I'm telling you is that in terms of bones and fossils on the face of this planet Earth, that there's not evidence for those transitions. There's really not. That's lacking. Not just in, and you've probably heard it said, terms like the missing link, or that we're looking for the link between man and monkey, but it's larger than that, because you would need gradual changes leading to every single variety of creature on the face of the planet Earth. When one really begins to look at the fossil record, the more you come to the conclusion that appears spontaneously. What that means is that the fossils that you see today, right? All of these creatures, their fossil evidence appears out of the thin blue sky as some place in the distant past. And I'll allow you to interpret that however you like. But it is in fact true that there just don't seem to be fossils transitioning from one to another. And the scope of which there would be, there should be, there has to be for that to occur. Let me give you very basic. I mean, the idea is there's a little bacteria moves into a double cellar into quad cellars, and then suddenly you get worms, then you get fish who start to fly, then you get fish who come on land, then you get little froggy-like creatures who are amphibious, and then you get land creatures, and they start growing fur, then they and so on, and then they start flying, and so on. And basically
just to sort of clarify, what I hear is that you don't get any transition anywhere. There's nothing has been proven in evolution. You don't have transition between species. All you have is adaptation within species. So species might change a little bit. A wolf might turn into a Pekingese dog, but you don't have like a cat turning into a wolf or anything like that.
Actually, yeah. In fact, the fossil record is evidence again. Many people actually believe that the fossil record is evidence for evolution. Because they're told that people, the data, people are told this supports evolution, that support, but when you really begin to look at it, none of it actually does. No, the fossil record is very bad for evolution because there are no transitional creatures. So in dogs, for example, and what Michael's talking about there, when you talk about variations within species, let me get to that in just a second because that's an important thing.
Okay, go ahead.
But what you're finding in the fossils is that Bronchiosaurus dinosaurs are always Bronchiosaurus dinosaurs. There's nothing leading to those big animals. Okay, a T-Rex is always a T-Rex. They may, each one may have little variations just like dogs, but these creatures are not transitioning one to the other. They're just simply not doing that. Now, when you delve into the DNA of something, and this is where Michael's talking about the variations, and this applies to the fossils too, because one of the things that the fossil record tells us is that we're losing things. See, we're losing stuff, and it's not just the dinosaurs that were once here that aren't here anymore, right? But we lose stuff every single year. Some people claim those numbers are more like 1,000 species. Others claim it's more like 10,000. But nobody is in disagreement that we are losing species. We're losing things. Okay, so that's a product of entropy. See, we're not gaining more complex things. What we're doing is losing stuff, and this applies on the genetic level as well. Like Michael was talking about wolves becoming variations of dogs. Well, actually, in a very technical sense, and in a very real way, a dog is a weaker creature than a wolf. What you're seeing is a Chihuahua is certainly a weaker genetic strand than a wolf. Now, what can happen is that a wolf has genetic coding for a whale, for example, or for a dinosaur, or for a dragonfly. But what a dog does have code for, what it is compatible with. Just like any type of software that you use. Software is compatible with other similar types of software. So dog genetic coding is only compatible with other dogs. Same thing with dragonflies, the same thing with the plants outside, the same thing with the dinosaurs, the same thing with our DNA. This is literally digital coding. Human beings, and in Darwin's day, of course, they didn't know any of this. Darwin, in his day, it was believed that a cell was as complex as a ping pong ball. In fact, Darwin said that if it were ever shown that the simplest forms of life were irreducibly complex, my theory would ultimately fall apart. Of course, we know that it is irreducibly complex. The parts of a cell, right? A cell, if you took every automated factory on the face of the planet Earth, combined them into a space so small that you can barely see it with our largest microscopes, you would be light years away from the technology employed in one single cell of this place. And that cell is run by digital programming code. So the suggestion that all of this happened accidentally, let me put this in perspective. You would need accidental, coordinated accidents that are symbiotic in nature to occur, and you would need all of these accidents to happen simultaneously to get what you have on the planet today. And I do not see how that's feasibly possible under Darwin's theory of evolution.
it's a problem, isn't it? But yet everybody seems to accept that the theory is that Darwin is the father of the theory, and that whatever he found is de facto the truth. When you look at the information he had and the conclusions he came to, it's quite scary. I mean, you were mentioning at one stage, we were talking about this, and you mentioned that a lot of assumptions he made with the knowledge we have today were completely nonsensical. So he looked at what did he look at? He looked at what are they called? Little froglets.
He was looking at finches. He was looking at
fish and stuff like that. Yeah. And he was comparing them to the development stages of an embryo, a human embryo. Yeah. And some of the diagrams were actually not correct, which he used for to show how an embryo develops. And he was modifying them to try and make them more similar to a fish.
Well, most of the things Darwin said turned out to be not correct, including evolution. And what we've done is we've continued to shuffle things around to get it to we're trying to force something. And so every time we run into another point where we find, oh shoot, it fails there, right? As opposed to saying, okay, there's a problem here. This is an enormous problem. This thing fails here, 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 and here. What we do is we keep making excuses for it and putting that problem stuff into a pile over here, and at some point later we'll solve that pile over there. Here's the problem, is that at this point, for a table full of monkey bones, half a lunch table of monkey bones, right? We have got mountains of problems that now include the genetics, right? Which all scream against this small segment of monkey bones, which seem to be the primary evidence on the face of the entire earth for all of this science-defying activity. And the folks want to believe this so dearly within certain segments of the scientific community, because I've not found. I'll hear people say that 95% of scientists believe in evolution. I certainly have not found that to be true. Certainly not any of the practical application sciences. Now, when you're dealing with university professors and you're dealing with theoretical guys that are out there, sipping brandy and talking about what they think might be true and philosophizing, those guys will tell you evolution's true all day long. But if I'm talking to somebody in a practical application science field, even if you're talking to somebody that develops video games for a living, anybody that deals with digital coding of any type, right? Anybody that has any understanding of how any structure similar to DNA would work, they would be absolutely out of their mind to suggest to you that they thought that the picture wasn't larger in scope. You have to bear in mind that as we have this phone conversation, we've been proficient at studying DNA for at least 20 years. Some would argue longer than that, but I'm talking about we're mapping the genome at this point. I mean, there's no confusion about the fact that you are dealing with tit for tat, line for line precision programming code that builds biological living organisms from scratch. And Darwin's theory from looking at finches on the Galapagos Islands is that this happens accidentally. What I'm telling you is that accidents don't tend to coordinate to create precision digital coding and produce biological organisms. And every experimental example shows that the reverse. It's not just that the law of entropy says that it can't happen. It's not just that the law of biogenesis says that it can't happen. It's not just that the Mendel's laws of biogenesis genetics say that it can't happen. It's not just that the law of information systems says that it can't happen. It's not just that the law of irreducible complexity says that it can't happen. It's not just that the law of it slipped my mind how many other, but the truth is, I wish I had a full list of them in front of me. I could keep on going. We'd be here for 5 minutes and you get bored hearing all of the laws that this violates. And let me tell you exactly how many laws evolution violates. It violates every single science that has to interact with it in any possible way. It's a 180-degree conflict with those. That's what I'm telling you when I'm saying they're not at war with the religious community. You can dislike the religious community all day long, but that has nothing to do. I don't like the religious community. But that does not mean that we used to be frogs one day or that we used to be tadpoles. And these questions, and so to me personally, to be pitching something in the educational system that even violated one scientific law, if this happened in any other spectrum of science, that it violated one other science law, they would abandon it. Most certainly they would abandon it if it violated two. But it violates all of them? Come on, man. I mean, at some point, and I've got guys writing up entire histories. I want you to conceptualize this. Even if you love evolution, even if you're so desperately in love with it that you can't do anything without it on the other side of this radio show, I want you to conceptualize this. Based on a table full of bones. Okay, we got no transitional fossils. Bear that in mind. None. Based on a small portion of bones, we've written up volumes of history based on a few bones. And the theory that we've used to write up this lengthy history violates every single science law known to man that has to interact with it. Under any other scenario, this would be called in psychological terms a self-reinforcing delusion.
It's interesting. But again, I sort of call back on a discussion we had some time ago. One of the problems with evolution is that you've got a theory and you collect a few facts and then you interpret these facts based on an assumption you have made on something else prior. So you've got an assumption based on an assumption based on an assumption, looking at a fact and creating another assumption. Yeah. So it's like this house of cards, which is just like one card after the other. And obviously, if you push any card over, the whole house would fall down. The problem is they don't dare to push any of these cards over, but many of these cards are just literally just as, they're not factual, they're just assumptions. For example, the assumption is that the creation is old, or that the world is old, or the assumption is that man is not created, that creation is impossible. That's one fundamental assumption evolution would do. So therefore they must fit everything into this concept, the idea that lower life form will create a higher life form, which again has not been proven. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, yeah, it is, and everything here is sophisticated beyond our capabilities. We're living in an. I hear the atheists a lot. They'll refer to, we've got iPads and things, so we must be really smart. What they're not conceptualizing is that the sophistication of the place is far beyond man's imagination. What you're dealing with any plant life or any animal life is you're literally dealing with programming code that's constructing these. Yeah. Okay, so you're dealing with and the code's different than our computer software. Like the computer that you're working on, that you're sitting at home with right now, works on something called binary code. Fundamentally, at the bottom of the code of your computer is little ones and little zeros. It's called binary code. It's 2-bit code. DNA is 4-bit, and it's 3-dimensional because it's building 3-dimensional biological organisms like yourself. Okay? But your body is not just comprised of digital coding. Your body is like a machine. If you don't believe that, go down to a medical hospital. Every part of your body is running systems, everything from your circulatory system to all of these different functional systems that all work together as a complete whole, a complete self-sustaining entity. Okay? So you're operating what amounts to a biological machine that is comprised of programming code. You're controlling this machine, the thing you call your human body. You're controlling it consciously, almost by Wi-Fi, and this has been one of the. And I have no idea. I have not heard anything from the evolution camp. I mean, this is another one of the things you put in the big pile of stuff that we'll figure out later, is how consciousness would consciously develop. But that subject alone, to me, is the most mesmerizing subject, because the fact is that you are controlling a tangible physical body, giving directions to it with pure synchronism every moment, every day. You're not even thinking about it. It's so seamless. And yet you are intangibly doing this. Now, you don't get to pick your body from the start, but you do got to work with it. and you are a conscious being. Now, I don't know if the consciousness consummates what makes up the entirety of what we call a soul, but it is certainly what's controlling your physical body. And the implications of the intangible controlling the tangible are that when that physical body dies, that you still exist.
Mm-hmm. Sobering thought. Yeah, it doesn't fit into evolution. So if you die, you are still around. Your consciousness is still there. What's going to happen?
Well, the real question also becomes, are you looking at everything that's here? You've got to remember, you're looking at a three-dimensional version of reality, and something that a created thing. Okay, let me make this simple. A created thing can never understand the full scope of its creator. Okay? You can't understand the reality that has not been presented to you. Right? So you can only understand the limited scope of the one that you're in. Now, what I would argue, which goes beyond the bounds of this simple argument of just that evolution doesn't work. So let me state what I believe is that you're living in a place that is couched in a much larger spiritual and dimensional reality by some mechanism. I can't tell you exactly how that works, but I can tell you this, that you're looking at a place that is full of symbiotic relationships, complexities in programming code. Even the universe itself is by no stretch of the imagination random. It's like a big Swiss watch. And my estimation is that you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of what really exists. And you're certainly not seeing how it was created. And to make the assumption that it came out of nowhere, that you're looking at functional system after functional system after functional system, and that somehow all of these symbiotic functional systems, right down to programming code that is self-constructing biological organisms, happened accidentally. A bare minimum, that's a stretch.
True.
Stretch. And I think if you begin to comb through it, you're going to find what I have, that mathematically it is not possible. And so it should come as no surprise when you're looking at a table full of monkey bones that the evidence simply isn't there for something that violates all the sciences. That what I'm telling you is this: there's a serious disconnect, and that disconnect is worthy of your attention. And I'm not even telling you on the other side of this show how it works, but I'm telling you at bare minimum that's a starting point.
Okay, so I mean, let's have a little bit of a break, a little bit of music, and then we'll come back. But just sort of to summarize, there are serious problems with evolution. Evolution has proven nothing. I mean, that's a statement I think both you and I are making. There isn't really any substantial proof that evolution is true. As time goes on and more evidence becomes available, we've got the genome, we've got fossil evidence, we've got more understanding, a deeper understanding of diverse kinds and species, and all of them don't tie up with evolution. All the science which is sort of emanating, or which has emanated over the last 100, 200 years, seem to prove the opposite. Not that what in the Origin of Species with Charles Darwin, what he tried to prove, or the point he tried to make, and based on that we haven't got a problem, but there is a problem, and there's a problem for people who sway themselves in security that they derive from a cell and they're pretty much coming from nothing. And ultimately they're going to nothing. It's not true. They've been created and they're eternal beings. They're going somewhere. And if you then assume this scenario, there's a consequence as well. And this consequence is that ultimately there is a God you're answerable to.